I'll call on Senator Herr to report members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Herr.
Mr. President, I'd like to report that Senator Fateh votes aye.
Fateh votes aye. I call on Senator Johnson to report members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Lang votes aye.
Lang votes aye. Senator Johnson.
Senator Thomasoni votes aye.
Thomasoni votes aye. Senator Johnson.
Senator Westrom votes aye.
Senator Weston votes aye. Secretary will close the roll. There being 67 ayes and no nays, the amended bill does pass and its title agreed to. Next bill on the special orders is Senate File 2575, General Orders Number 14, Senator Gazelka.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I have 2575. It's a simple bill addressing curriculum transparency. I will tell you, I've had the opportunity to travel around the state and have talked to a lot of different parents that are frustrated. I think with the closing of schools and distance learning, the silver lining of the whole thing is many parents got more involved in their kids' education, and that's a good thing. But as they began to hear some of what was being taught in the classrooms, they were frustrated because they didn't feel like they had a voice. And I have a copy of something coming around that shows that since 2020, 22,700 kids have left the public school system. And so what it tells me is we better start listening because they've been trying to get our attentions. Parents have been showing up at school boards across the state wanting to be more involved. And one of the things they talked about is, why don't we have access to the curriculum? Well, in statute, it does say that parents are supposed to have access to the curriculum. And so, Mr. President, this bill is simple. It simply states two things. Number one, that at the beginning of the school year, curriculum must be made available to the parents so that they know that the curriculum is available. And number two, that it's free of charge to the parent, so that there shouldn't be any obstacle of not knowing, or number two, a school district preventing the parents from getting that material. And this is a very positive thing. And I want to say that the Minnesota School Board Association and the Association of Metropolitan School Districts and the Minnesota Association of School Administrators said, we encourage you to strive to enact policies that ensure parents are involved in their child's education. In short, our school board members and administrators welcome parents and community engagement. So, Mr. President, members, that's what this is about. And beyond that, I'll stand for questions.
Discussion to Senate File 2575. Seeing none, the Secretary will give the Senate file its third reading.
Senate File number 2575, a bill for an act relating to education.
Third reading. Any further discussion? Senator Uyghur.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me strongly reaffirm the Senate DFL's enthusiastic support for parental involvement. Parents are the primary teacher, that teachers welcome and embrace the parents to be involved in the classroom. And it's going on as we speak throughout Minnesota. Would Senator Gazelka please yield?
Senator Gazelka will yield. Senator Uyghur.
Senator Gazelka, there are 325 school districts, 180 charters, over 2,100 classrooms. Can you tell me, in one school or one classroom where parents don't have a right to be involved in the curriculum or instruction or having access to materials?
Senator Gazelka.
And excuse me, Mr. President, I also, when I went, I know this was a big deal, and you mentioned you've been traveling the state, and I looked at the website, and you're quoted on your caucus website as saying, unfortunately, Minnesota parents are being shut out of the classroom by teachers by teachers. They're being shut out of the classroom and administrative bureaucrats who think they know best. Senator Gazelka, please be specific as to which district, which classroom we're talking about.
Senator Gazelka.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Uyghur, well, I got letters from parents in Orono, Waconia, Sartell, Foley, St. Michael's, Minnetonka, and more. And that's just being out and about and talking to parents where they are frustrated. And we know that we want parents involved. I mean, I think that's what we're all talking about. I'm glad that, Senator Uyghur, that you think that's a good idea. The goal of this bill is to create a cooperative relationship between the parents, the teachers, and their school board for the success of their kids. And so if you have 22,000 children leaving the public school because their parents have said, we don't feel like our voice is being heard, that should get all of our attention. And so that's what this bill is about. It's not changing the law. It's just that the parents, we need to have a notice that they have the curriculum available to them and that it needs to be free of charge for them.
Senator Uyghur.
Yes, Mr. President, I would agree that there's a lot of frustration out there. Frustration on lack of resources for schools. More on that later. Senator Gazelka, would you continue to yield?
He will. Senator Uyghur.
Senator Gazelka, in committee, I asked whether you had consulted with the largest parent organization in Minnesota, the Minnesota PTA, which has over 200 chapters in the state and has been here for 101 years. Senator Gazelka, have you, since the hearing, had a chance to consult with the Minnesota PTA?
Senator Gazelka.
Mr. President, Senator Uyghur, as I said then, I went directly to the parents. I've talked and been around hundreds and hundreds of parents that have expressed frustration. And as I told you in committee, if you're not listening to the parents and the 22,000 kids that have left the public school, you better be listening. And I'm trying to move towards a place of making the public schools more successful, and that means listening to the parents. And it may be different in Minneapolis and St. Paul than it is in Roseau, but if the parents feel like their voice is not being heard, then I'm telling you their voice is not being heard.
Senator Uyghur.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Senator Gazelka, and maybe more on Roseau later, but you mentioned you're listening to the parents. Senator Gazelka, do you feel the Minnesota PTA is a representative organization of parents?
Mr. President,
Senator Gazelka.
Senator Uyghur, I'm not here to say one way or the other the PTA. I respect what they're doing. I respect what the teachers are doing, the school administrators, all of the people involved in our kids' educations, but listening directly to parents around the state gives me a good feel for what's going on. Why are 22,000 students no longer part of the public school? That is the question I think you need to ask, and that comes from listening to parents that are frustrated that there are different things being taught that they didn't know about, and had they known about, they would have taken what our statute says and given a different alternative form of education of which the parents would have cooperated with the school district and found something that they would teach at their expense. And that's all we're asking here, Senator Uyghur, is that we have an opportunity for parents to have their voice being heard and know what's going on in the classroom.
Senator Uyghur.
Yes, Mr. President, there is that opportunity now in the parental curriculum review. There are several existing pathways for involvement, and I'd like to shed light on what the Minnesota Parent-Teacher Association says, because I hadn't heard testimony in committee, and I contacted them. There's a letter, I believe it's been distributed, and I believe that the largest parent organization their position should be on the record. The mission of the PTA is to make every child's potential a reality by engaging and empowering families and communities to advocate for all children. What are we hearing from Minnesota PTA members? Minnesota parents expect that their children will learn in a school that welcomes all students, that provides a high-quality education, that engages with and is accountable to all parents and families. Learning during the pandemic provided parents and families new ways to see their children's education up close and personal, to be immersed in it in a way that they never were before. Minnesota PTA members are using the power of their voices to speak up, to hold our schools and districts and state and federal decision makers accountable for meeting our expectations. And parents and families want our public schools to have the resources, I emphasize the resources they need to meet the individual needs of our diverse students across the state. Minnesota PTA cannot support any of the proposed Parents' Bill of Rights in their current form. Senate File 2575, for example, provides no better language than what already exists, no better language than what already exists in Minnesota law to arm parents with information and remedies regarding their child's education and the power to act on making education better for all students. In a review, and this is the PTA who their board met over the weekend, in our review of existing Minnesota law, we found more than 44 existing provisions that require parents and families have access to review the content of instructional materials, and if they object, to make reasonable arrangements for alternative instruction, to require parent participation in developing their individual students' education plans, policies that require specific notices to parents, that require parent and family members on district and school advisory committees, require district and school plans for parent and family engagement, policies in place now that delineate the rights of parents and families at hearings and mediation regarding their children, model policies that reflect these laws and guide their implementation in Minnesota districts and schools mention these requirements more than 33 times. There's no evidence that Senate File 2575 and 2909 would do anything to improve the implementation. They wouldn't do anything to improve the implementation of the multiple provisions that already exist. Many of our Minnesota PTA members are actively engaged in existing pathways and have provided important perspectives in schools and districts across the state. Nothing should divert district, school, and parent focus away from existing efforts to implement these important existing opportunities for parent engagement, empowerment, and advocacy. This is the point of view of the largest parent organization in the state. We had testimony in committee as well from teachers, and one teacher shared, and this is a teacher in the Farmington district, Kendra Kaduff, a special ed teacher, a reading specialist for 20 years. Referring to this bill, the state of Minnesota already has comprehensive supports for parents, cites one of the statutes. It provides for parental curriculum review and for alternative education in the event that a parent has a problem with materials. The bill is a solution in search of a problem, said the special ed teacher. Parents already have statutory protections in place, as well as informal ones. Parents reach out proactively to teachers when they have concerns about curriculum, and teachers must modify lesson plans as needed. The bill is unnecessary. Senator Gazelka, you cited the School Boards Association and other groups, and I'm not sure if it was implied that they were supportive of this. Is there concerns, et cetera? Yeah, absolutely. We share those, and we have many prospective ways to improve on the frustration. But for the record, the Minnesota School Boards Association, the AMSD Association of Metro School Districts, and the Association of School Administrators, in a letter, which is also distributed, they said, why have we should avoid time-consuming and costly new mandates. There are, can't use a prop, okay. There are many proposals, model policies that have been adopted. And I have them here, and they were provided in committee. And Senator Gazelka, for those districts, and you said Orono, and if there's a member of the school board, and I think they should be, to tell their concerns. There are avenues, pathways, as shared by the PTA. And if it's not working, we have remedies in place. Some, again, have questioned the need for this, and they have said, let's focus on the real needs that parents are asking for, additional resources to address lower class size, to address special education, which has an enormous public crossover subsidy, and we need to take care of that. Parents are talking about a number of items. We'll talk more on that later, but the PTA has made that clear, and if you look further on their letter, they suggest a number of things on policy, and more resources are needed for our schools. That's what parents want. Thank you.
Before we continue, just a word of advice, Senator Uyghur. We do have Mason's section 112, reading of papers, number 6. I think it's okay to read from notes, but you may want to read that section of Mason's for future reference. I didn't see a question in that commentary, so I will go to Senator Gazelka.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, for clarity for the members, this is already in statute, so there shouldn't be any extra expense for what I'm asking for. And if the PTA says it's not necessary, well, then they're wrong in this particular situation. All the parents are asking is why they didn't have the curriculum available to them. All this bill does that changes that is it says school districts must notify and inform parents of this policy at the beginning of each school year by the United States mail, email, or other direct form of communication, and must include the policy in the official school handbook or official school policy guide. What are you afraid of? Why would we not want the parents to know what is already in statute? What are you afraid of? And I won't say that the Minnesota School Board Association, Association of Metropolitan School Districts, and Minnesota Association of School Administrators support this bill, but that was their testimony that they encouraged, when we had these bills, they said, we encourage you to strive to enact policies that ensure parents are involved in their children's education. And members, we can no longer say that Minnesota is a national leader of education excellence. And if we don't start thinking about how do we make changes to get back to that position as national leader of education excellence, then we're all in trouble, because it's our kids that are our future. And whether you're a minority student in Minneapolis and St. Paul, or all around the state where parents are saying, I want to be engaged, I want to make a difference, we've got to start making changes. And the biggest thing that we need to do is open the doors wide open and get parents involved and let them know they can be involved and that we want them involved. And if they disagree about something related to sex education standards or what they want to read in English or what they're learning for history, the fact that they want to communicate and be engaged with that school is a really, really positive thing. So this is statute already. We're just saying they need to be notified at the beginning of the school year, and a school district has to do it for free.
Senator Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, a lot of the points that I was going to make have been discussed, and the first one was talking about the current Minnesota parental curriculum review status, and Governor,
I'll take it.
I'm overstepping. Senator Gazelka. No, you had talked about the Minnesota parental curriculum review statute. You're right, it is in place. It basically allows a review of curriculum by parents and requires schools to provide alternative instruction for students if the parent objects to a particular course or unit or topic. And as a former high school principal, I had some of those meetings from time to time, usually with the teacher and the course in question where the subject is being taught. We would sit down, we'd talk about that, we'd reach perhaps a compromise on some things, but also I would encourage the teacher and the student to meet, talk more specifically about the curriculum, and then I'd also encourage the parent to go sit in on the classes, and so they could see firsthand what was being taught. We also know, as Senator Uyghur has indicated, that parents have a lot of options to address curriculum and instruction concern. There are school district curriculum and instruction, advisory councils. We have site councils, of which I, as principal, had a site council. We would meet monthly with parents, students, teachers, and we'd talk about a number of different issues going on in the schools, as well as curriculum. And then we have the state curriculum review every 10 years, that cycle. So there's opportunities for public to serve and also provide comment. The major concern that I have with Senate File 2575 is that the bill further enables the opportunity for increased requests for data without reimbursement to the district for the collection and printing of the requested information. There is a handout on your desk about the situation in Rochester, and I'll just go over some of the others. Owatonna Public Schools recently received a request in August, which the district estimated will result in a 2 million page report. Rochester Public Schools received a 41-page request, which the district estimates will cost over $900,000. My own school district, Rosemont Apple Valley Egan Public Schools, received a request that initially estimated it would take 2 years to fulfill. They went back and talked with the group. They did pare down their list of specific words that they wanted searched throughout the district, but still the district had to hire 2 people and is still working on that project. So that's a concern. This is eating up precious resources and time. School districts are taking away resources from the classroom. These are not minimal expenses. These are major expenses to school districts. Now, many of you in this body have served on school boards. And I think you must ask yourself, is this what you support? This bill would further encourage overreaching data request demands, which are designed for no other purpose than to bury districts. There are data requests that are reasonable, and would Senate Gazelka yield for a question?
He will yield. Senator Clausen.
Senator Gazelka, would you support that districts be compensated for the resources they are using in fulfilling some of these data requests?
Senator Gazelka.
Mr. President, Senator Clausen, first of all, I'd say that this is already in statute, so I don't see much of a difference from where we're at right now. What I do think is by communicating more with the parents, teachers communicating with the parents, and administrators like yourself that I think probably did a good job when you were there, it's going to head off a lot of those massive requests because the communication has begun earlier.
Senator Clausen.
Well, I appreciate that response, and thank you, Mr. President. Actually, Mr. President, you and I had a discussion about this, you may recall, in state government, and you were concerned about data requests for cities and how that was going to be just a bill that we were discussing and how it was going to increase the number of requests and the costs that were being placed on cities. And I see the same thing happening here. I think one of the things in the first sentence, I think, of the bill, it talks about that these informational has to be at no cost to the person making the request, that this is all being placed as a burden onto the school districts. And this is really taking precious resources away from our students, from our teachers, from our classrooms. And I this is the one area of this bill that I just have a real problem with. It's going to open the gates to further frivolous data requests that just eat up resources and time. And I just find that I can't vote for this. So thank you.
Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Point of parliamentary inquiry.
State your point.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Uyghur mentioned he passed out letters from the School Boards Association, AMSD, and others. I don't have those letters in front of me. I was wondering if Senator Uyghur could make those available.
Senator Uyghur, I'm sure, will get copies of those and make sure that they are signed so that they are appropriate for dispensation on the floor. Senator Uyghur.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. President, Senator Pratt, yeah, the copies were made and I thought they were distributed. They will be promptly.
Next on my list is Senator Wicklund.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to speak a little bit today just based on my experience with being a parent and being very involved in my kids' classroom experiences over the years, which led me to get more involved in school-based committees that looked at curriculum. And I think that the opportunities were there when I was going through those years with my kids. I participated in the curriculum committee that looked at the different subject areas. Each year they would take up a different subject area and review that. I think that opportunity is still available for parents. I was also a member of the Bloomington School Board and served on that because I did want to continue to bring parent voice to the community level of the school board. I found that teachers, over my time, my experience, personal experience with teachers and with schools, dealing with them as a school board member, teachers are very interested in developing relationships with their families and communicating with them all aspects of what they're doing in the classroom. I don't think that this bill will add any value to that. I disagree that it won't have any impact. The current laws that are in place do allow for and prescribe that parents will be involved in decision making and in viewing and access to curriculum materials. But the words that are added to this, the words about adding without cost and immediately upon request, I think that will add a definite burden for school districts, for teachers, for staff, in terms of time and cost. And I think that takes away from what teachers want to do each day, which is to spend time with their students, teaching them and also learning, what can they do and modify to make the kids, to help their kids learn even more. And that requires them to interact with parents, to understand the families, and understand what the students need. I also wanted to say that I believe that families are or community members are happy with the way school districts are offering opportunities. Bloomington did a community survey in 2022, and the good job communicating, 83% of the respondents felt that the school district did a good job communicating. To trust to do what is right, 81% agreed with that statement. And 58% agreed that they were satisfied with decision making. And according to this survey, that 49% of the people responding were people who follow the school board either closely or somewhat closely. And they also believe that the school district is financially managed well, 63%. But what I thought was really striking was they asked about school funding, and 54% believe that the school district was not funded adequately. That, I think, gets at what parents are really concerned about and our community members all community members are concerned about. Having adequate funding to be able to provide instruction and all of the learning opportunities that our students need. And this includes having adequate staffing for mental health needs, for counselors, for social workers, nurses, which we know are not funded at adequate levels. I believe that's what we should be spending our time talking about this early in the session. If we're going to talk about education, that's what we should be talking about. How do we encourage our teachers to stay in the profession and help parents see that their kids have the opportunities that they need? So I will be voting no on this bill. Thanks.
Senator McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I just have a couple comments on this bill that I'd like to offer. I'm a proud graduate of our public schools in Minnesota. I'm the daughter and granddaughter of proud graduates of our public schools in Duluth. And I have to say that when we stand here with a $9 billion surplus, it strikes me what I have heard in meetings with teachers, when I have met with them. There are real needs in our schools. We have districts around our state that are talking about making cuts. We have a problem with retention because teachers have had it. Now, I'm a parent of 2 kids in our public schools right now, and frankly, I find it unconscionable that these are the bills that we are considering in this chamber today when this is the situation, when we have a $9 billion surplus and we have cuts being talked about throughout the state. We need to fully fund our public schools. I will not be voting for this legislation, and I encourage my colleagues also to join me in not voting for it. Thank you.
Senator Isaacson.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. We've had an interesting discussion here, but I think that I really want us to understand there was an even more interesting discussion in committee about this bill. We heard some really interesting things from the testifiers that Senator Gazelka brought to talk about why this bill was important. And I think it's something that I'd love to have a quick discussion with Senator Gazelka about if he'd yield for a question. Senator
Gazelka. I'm sorry, Senator Isaacson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Gazelka, I asked you a question in committee about what one of your testifiers who said that the words diversity and equity were divisive and shouldn't be in public classrooms. She said...
Sorry. Continue.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry. And I had asked you if you thought that was an accurate statement, and your response was you would need an example of it to know for sure how it could be applied. And at the time I thought, that's fair, I get that. So then I began to ponder that question, and you know what? I couldn't come up with an example. I tried to think of a for instance. I asked my friends. I have friends that are teachers, and I asked them, and we couldn't come up with one. So I'm wondering if maybe you could just think of an example that would justify saying ever in a Senate committee that diversity and equity are divisive words.
Mr. President, Senator Isaacson, that's not where I'm going to head in this discussion. The curriculum transparency, I didn't read the many letters that I got from parents and the issues that they brought up because they were all over the board. And the point is that I want the parent to be engaged with the teacher, with the school administrator, on whatever the topic is that they want to have a conversation about. And that's where the focus of this is. It's not on anything else related to that. It could be an issue like what you brought up. It could be something completely different. But the focus is on letting the parents see the curriculum and then have that conversation.
Senator Isaacson.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing you say is that the person that testified really didn't touch on what your bill was or what you're trying to accomplish. That's good to know. Second question for you is your testifier said, this is the first step in a series of efforts to really change the way we look at parenting. And I'm just wondering, because I asked you, the way we look at teaching and parenting and their relationship, I asked you, what was the outcome once we know the things you think we're going to find out from your bill, what's next? And you didn't seem to know that, but your testifier seemed to be pretty sure that there was more steps to come. And I'm just wondering if you could elucidate to us what those steps might be.
Senator Gazelka.
Mr. President, Senator Isaacson, well, the steps according to the bill is that you work with the school and you develop a alternative form of education in that area that the parent objects to what their student is learning at the expense of that parent, no matter what the subject is. That's how you work through that. And that should be the goal of all of us, is to get the parents engaged in their kids' education, listen to the parents, which I think the vast majority of teachers and administrators do. But if there's somebody that wants to box them out, this is the tool that the parent has to be engaged.
Senator Isaacson.
Well, thank you, Senator Gazelka and Mr. President. I appreciate that. So let's take that example you just gave us, and we have a parent who thinks that words like diversity and equity shouldn't be taught in the classroom and are divisive, and they bring that to the teacher in the school. What's the outcome in that situation? What outcome is likely to happen if your bill passes?
Senator Gazelka.
Mr. President, Senator Isaacson, they're going to have a robust conversation about what is it that they're concerned about, and they're going to find solutions together, and that's the whole point. If we're going to have good education, the parents have to be engaged in that process. There has to be good communication and good flow, and if that's the case, then we're going to get to a good solution at the end of that.
Senator Isaacson.
I can't imagine a solution that doesn't involve the reality that that student's going to learn about diversity and equity. But let's take it further. So I'm thinking about your argument that 22,000 students are leaving public schools, and you had cited you got 6 or 7 letters stating that it was because of how mad they were about what they found out their kids were learning, or something about how they weren't getting information that they wanted. And I'm wondering if you know what a logical reasoning fallacy is. And I want to give you an example of what I mean. In 1998 to 2006, there is a direct correlation between the number of people who died drowning in pools and the number of movies Nick Cage appeared in movie theaters. There's also a direct correlation between cheese that's been consumed and the number of people that died from their bed sheets getting tangled up in bed. That is a reasoning fallacy, to say one is correlated to the other. It seems that you're conveniently forgetting that we just went through a pandemic in which many people had to stay home because of situations with their family, because they're worried about their own safety. In our case, we had a grandparent who had just had a lung transplant. We couldn't expose them. And that a lot of people were staying home because of that. Isn't it possible that maybe the reason people weren't going to the public schools had more to do with their life circumstances around COVID than some people that were unhappy about what they learned about what was being taught at their schools? Senator Gazelka?
Senator Gazelka.
Mr. President, Senator Isaacson, you forget that the governor shut down the schools and forced the kids to be home and do distance learning, which did a huge disservice to our kids. But the silver lining I mentioned there was that in that distance learning, parents began to listen to what their kids were learning and said, wait a minute. And that's why you have 22,000 kids whose parents have said, I don't want them in the public school. And so I'm asking all of us, are you listening to the parent? And that's what I don't think is happening. And that's why I'm saying this is an opportunity to help listen to the parents.
Senator Isaacson.
Senator Gazelka, I think I maybe can say that better for you. You mean the time that the governor had to shut down the schools to protect our seniors and the most vulnerable among us from a pandemic. I think that's what you were trying to say. That isn't how that exactly came out, but let's be really clear about that. When we talk about the pandemic and what the governor did to help keep us safe, that was essentially important. And is it tough that we had kids that had to stay home from school? Absolutely. And are there some kids that are still choosing to do that? So I appreciate you making my point for me. Still choosing not to go back? That's entirely possible. Is it because they learned something in their classroom that they're suddenly not happy about being taught? That's where the reasoning fallacy is, sir. That's a really important assertion to make. And let me make it really clear. Let me tell you what I think the outcome of your bill is going to be. The outcome I think of your bill is really putting two things against each other that I think I want to make sure everybody understands. There is a difference between being told what I'm learning, my kids are learning I'm not happy with, and not being told what I'm learning, what my kids are learning. In my experience, what I've heard is there are some people who are unhappy that their kids are learning things they don't think align with their political or religious ideologies. That's much different than not learning what their kids are actually engaged in. We have a bunch of parents that had to become more engaged, which is good, in what their children were doing in schools. I think that's really important. I think we all agree with that, right? What I'm concerned about is that just because you don't like what your kids are learning doesn't mean they shouldn't learn it. Things like slavery, right? Things about white institutional racism, white privilege. These things are real things that are systemic throughout our systems of government, education, healthcare. And just because it's uncomfortable for someone to learn it because it doesn't jive with their beliefs doesn't make it any less real. When I look at this bill, and as you presented it in fact, sir, these are opinions, and you are entitled to your own opinions, but you are not entitled to your own facts, and that just isn't the way the world works. And it's important that we people, our students, are given a full perspective of what they should learn in school, and putting this situation together looks like you're trying to inhibit that. And that's really unacceptable to me, so I'll be voting no. Thank you.
Senator Swedzinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll also be voting against this bill. The thing I find troubling with it is what's already been brought up numerous times: without cost and immediately upon request. Without cost and immediately upon request, the opening words in the bill. And when I first saw this letter that Senator Clausen put on our desks, I thought it said $90,000. And I thought, okay, that's a lot of money, $90,000 for one request. And then I started reading the article, and I realized I misread it. It's $900,000 for one school district for one request. And this is coming from a school district. And that's 15, to the best of my math skills, 15 first-year teachers. $900,000 is 15 first-year teachers. So if this bill gets passed, and if a school district gets one request, that clearly it seems like it's an unfunded mandate from the legislature, and it's an undue burden for the school districts, that they're going to have to lay off 15 first-year teachers in order to fulfill this request. And the administrative person, even if there's just one person that has to do this, and if this number is grossly inflated, and the actual number is 30,000, which according to the district it's not, let's just assume that the best case scenario is that each district has one person that's their job to make sure these requests are fulfilled. That's one teacher. That's one teacher per district that won't be in the classroom working with our children. It'll be an administrator going through the paperwork to fulfill these requests. Our teachers want things taken off their plates right now. They are exhausted. They're exasperated. They are done. I saw a recent survey somewhere. It said in August, 37% of teachers, after last year, we were all suffering last year. All of us were done with COVID. We were wiped out. We were exhausted. We were exasperated. But our teachers had a different world, a different experience. And in August, before the school year began, 37% of our teachers said, I'm thinking about leaving the profession earlier than I had hoped. Think about these teachers that their dream since 7th grade was to be like their 7th grade teacher. Their dream since they were in 11th grade was to be like their 11th grade teacher. And now, a third in August were thinking about leaving the profession. Well, that same survey was conducted in January. The number's up to 55%. 55%, over half of our teachers are thinking of leaving the profession early. We should be sitting on this floor in every legislature in America right now talking about what can we do to take things off your plate, teachers, so that you can do the job you love, instilling a love of learning in our youth. Because that's what public school is all about. That's why the founders set up public schools in the first place, was to raise a civic-minded, civically engaged population that would carry on the torch of democracy. So in the coming days and months on this floor, anything that I don't think is taking something off the plate of our teachers so that they can spend more time with the kids, I'll most likely be voting against. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Gazelka.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, for clarification, the article that Senator Clausen put out is not, it's actually under Chapter 13 of the data practice request, which means that 901,000, that wouldn't apply in this situation. But one thing I wanted to bring up too is that this original, the statute that we're looking at right now, was passed by the Democrat-controlled Senate back when Polgamiller was the education chair. So this should be bipartisan, that we have the parents involved in the process. Thank you.
Senator Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, again, we always appreciate a good discussion in the Senate floor, state of Minnesota. I, too, was a proud graduate of public education, as were my children, our children. Very proud graduates, had a very good experience with that. But what is this really about? Senator Gazelka just clarified it's just about the statute already exists, just notification. It's been there for a long time, just notification. So ultimately, this isn't about the statute. It's about trust. It's about partnerships, rebuilding trust, building partnerships with educators and parents. For years, I have heard, and people have desired that parents be more involved in the kids' education. We all agree to that. I think we all do. We've heard about it for years, and I think it should be. This is about trust, about encouraging partnerships between parents and educators for the ultimate benefit of the children. There's a lot of things being said about the bill that the bill doesn't contain. Anybody who reads it will see that. It just says at the beginning of the year, the school has to advise the parents of the statutory right that already exists. Nothing more, nothing less. And the kids are a creation of the state, a creation of the parents. They're not a creation of the state. Kids are not a creation of the state. We just want to ensure public school system remains strong going into the future. There's been a lot of challenges and problems in the last couple of years, obviously. But this bill will simply help improve communication and encourage those discussions. And that is what we hope for. Stronger public schools, stronger relationships between parents and educators, and improving that trust. And by the way, when you do that, amazing things happen. Over the years, many of you have been here while we have discussed the dyslexia literacy issue. Many of you, bipartisan, have participated in that and helped move that issue along. That is about parents, grassroots, working with the legislature, working with the school system, and across party lines to build trust and bring forward solutions. And that is what this is about. And that is what can happen. Where we're at a point today, we are going to bring tools to the teachers. And Senator Uyghur knows that, Senator Clausen knows that. Many of my colleagues across the aisle realize that because they've worked on these bills and we have included them in on the discussions. And they've been helpful. So we are trying, just as a side note, we have a lot of bills that are coming through committee that are trying to relieve the burdens on teachers and educators in the system. So I would expect all my colleagues from across the aisle to do just that and support every one of them. We have them coming through the committee to reduce the burdens on educators. So now that I've heard that you're wanting that, come on forward, and I would expect full support for those bills. We had testimony in the committee last week on something just like that, where the educators are in full support of it. So, trust, solutions, encouraging partnerships, parents, educators, for the ultimate benefit of the child. That is what this is. Nothing more, nothing less. Thank you, members. Encourage a green vote.
Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Gazelka made the point that I wanted to make, and I'm just going to reiterate it. What Senator Gazelka's bill does is really two things. One, it says you have to notify parents of their rights, notify parents of the existing law. And I know that when I was on the board and when I had kids in school, student handbooks went out. All sorts of information to families were handed out. You had to sign them and return them back to the school. What's so hard about putting in a little clause in that student handbook that says, oh, by the way, you have this right under Minnesota law that's been there for many, many years? And then I think Senator Gazelka hit it on the nose, is what we're talking about is curriculum review. If I have a question about curriculum, I can be handed a textbook, I can be handed classroom material. There's no obligation here, as I read it, Mr. President, to have to do a lengthy word search of a 41-page request on some terms that would cost, roughly $22,000 a page of the request, according to the Rochester schools. So that sounds like more than just a curriculum request. That sounds like a data practices or a freedom of information request. I've been a member of the school board, and I've supported public schools for many, many years, well over 20 years, serving on parent groups, serving as a member of the PTA. And I want to thank Senator Uyghur for handing this letter out from the School Boards Association, Metro School Districts, and school administrators. He said they oppose the bill, but this looks like a pretty neutral letter to me. There's nothing I see in this letter that states true opposition. Sure, they say they don't want time-consuming and costly new mandates, but the argument can be made that providing the material to a parent as already directed by state law is not a costly new mandate. Putting a phrase and having it signed and returned back to the school saying, parents, you have this right under existing state law is not a time-consuming and costly new mandate. Members, this is an extremely reasonable bill. It's not at all what the opponents have made it out to be. Everyone that has testified, everyone in this chamber, in committee, and through their letters, have stated they all support parental right and parental engagement. I've long said parental engagement is one of the key pieces to the success of a student in the classroom. We should encourage it, Mr. President, and I encourage members to vote yes on the Gazelka bill.
Senator Isaacson.
Well, Mr. President, there was one point I wanted to make, and then I wasn't going to, and then both Senator Gazelka and Senator Chamberlain brought it back up again. So I'm happy to have just a quick thought on this. First of all, color me surprised and pleased to hear the acknowledgement from my friends across the aisle that we have a crisis in education. I've been saying that from this desk for 5 years. I've been talking about the burden on teachers and the concerns that are going on in our schools. I've been shouting that from the rooftops, on the Twitter's accounts, and everywhere I go. You're right, but I want to maybe point out one thing, and this goes to Senator Gazelka's comments earlier. Yeah, we are in a crisis, and a big chunk of that crisis was a failure of your leadership when it comes to the way we funded in the last 5 years. Period. Period. The disinvestment in education has come and been led by the majority in the Senate, the GOP. Don't let that fact be lost on anybody here. So it's a little disingenuous for me when I hear you crying wolf about how concerned you are right now all of a sudden about education, when your lack of funding supports for education for the last 5 years or longer are one of the direct reasons why we're in that position. And now you have a bill that creates further problems for teachers in the schools, doesn't solve a problem, and all you're really actually doing, let's be honest, is just reaffirming a statute that's already there, to be honest. That's really the bottom line. That's what we're spending our time on? We have teachers in crisis. I talk to my teachers at my school, my kids all the time. They're exhausted and tired. Do you think this is what they're waking up this morning thinking, oh, I bet this is what will make my situation better in the classroom? Come on. So that kind of disingenuous rhetoric is really difficult to hear, and I can imagine how frustrating it is for teachers if they hear that. I suggest with a bill like this, we stay in your lane and not start talking and pontificating about how big the crisis is, that by the way, you had a huge hand in making.
Senator Friends.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, members. Senator Chamberlain, I heard, quote, we are going to bring tools for the teacher. We didn't bring them today, but I look forward to hearing what tools they are. Here's the situation, members. You have a bill before us about public education, and you have the Parent-Teacher Association against it. That Parent-Teacher Association has over 200 units and thousands of parents. So it begs the question how we can suggest that parents in Minnesota want this bill when the association that is charged with giving the voice to parents in our education says we don't want this bill. The teachers don't want this bill, and I'd encourage this chamber to think very carefully about some of the heartfelt comments from our members who are educators, because you're starting to see the truth bubble to the surface here today, and that is teachers have been through a lot, and they're stressed, and they don't like it, and they're not liking this bill. This week, we had a chance to meet with teachers. I was part of a group from my neck of the woods, including some teachers from Senator Dames in my district. And here's what one of those teachers said. Believe me, she was emotional. I mean, you're wondering why people are starting to resign this spring way earlier than before. Well, they are looking at the climate and what's going on, and that isn't welcoming or appreciative. It's insulting. And so as we try to debate what's best for our students and our teachers and our administrators and our communities and our economy, our future as a state, the state, I might add, that has the #1 highest ACT scores in the country right now. That's the quality that our teachers are delivering. You better ask yourself what a vote on this bill says to our teachers, and in particular says about our ability to recruit and retain the next generation of teachers, because this teacher here is telling me it's going to be a heck of a lot tougher, and this bill is not moving us in the direction they want us to move. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of this bill. A few years ago, I decided to run for school board in Lakeville because I thought working on behalf of kids and their education, working in combination with parents and teachers, well, how in the world could that be politically divisive? And as we look at this bill here, which is pretty simple, it's just about providing, really it's just a bill about answering questions that come up from parents. It's not a bill designed to vilify teachers or educators. It's not a bill designed to put an undue burden upon our educators who, yes, rightfully so, have, especially over the last couple of years, worked tremendously hard in ways in which we never would have imagined. The things our teachers and educators and district staffs have been asked to do were unimaginable over the last couple of years. And the same can be said of parents as well as our students. I happened to be on the Lakeville School Board on the onset of the pandemic, and as you can imagine, the number of emails and communications I started getting from parents, if you were to chart it out, kind of looked like this, and then as the pandemic hit, well, of course, the number of questions and communications increased dramatically. But here's the deal. I was grateful for that, because every parent that emailed or called or texted me was an opportunity for us to engage in conversation, to answer questions, to shed some light on oftentimes which were thoughts and concerns that were just misunderstood or misconstrued. So I've had the opportunity to go to bat for teachers and educators as well as to go to bat for parents that have questions. And what I learned from that situation was this. Due to what's already in state statute and to what this bill would do, which is enhancing what's already in state statute, we're simply allowing for that conversation to take place sooner and in a whole different variety of ways that will benefit the educators and parents and strengthen that partnership as we put our kids and their education first. And as we ended session last year, I made the comment that we need to work together as a legislature to strengthen the relationship between parents, our schools, and teachers, and that it wasn't something we should run away from. This is us running two options on how we can strengthen that communication and relationship between our teachers and educators. So if there are educators out there watching and hearing the debate today, I want to be crystal clear to you. This bill is not an attempt to say you're doing something wrong. This bill is not an attempt to question your motives and what you're doing in the classroom and how you're going about educating our kids. We trust you. We want our public schools to succeed. We want you to succeed in the classroom because that means our communities are succeeding. But what we also want to do is prompt those conversations and communications between our teachers and parents as soon as we can so that we can all get on the same side, be on the same team, and work on the behalf of our kids. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Kent.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, so there's the PTA and then there's the PTSOs or PTOs. They're different legally. We have all kinds. As a former PTSO president, I am very familiar with listening to parents and working with parents to make sure that they are aware of what's going on and that their voices are being heard, and it is hugely important. And I've been listening to parents a lot. I'm just 2 years out of the world of being a public high school parent myself. I hear parents in my community every day. They are struggling. Their kids are struggling. This is not what they're struggling about. They're struggling about, as Senator Isaacson rightly pointed out, we've been through a pandemic. And our schools, and my school district in particular, it's not Minneapolis or St. Paul, but they have taken very seriously the local control aspect of this. They have been very responsible and sensitive in evolving as the pandemic has evolved to make sure that our kids can be in school as much as possible, but there are still disruptions. There are disruptions in their education. There's disruption in their learning. There's disruption in their routine, which we all know is so important for all kids, but especially for some. There's disruption in just being around their friends, their activities that mean so much to them. And Lord knows, there is disruption and pain in their mental health. That's what our kids are experiencing, and that's what our parents are telling us over and over and over again. We had a finance hearing this morning on a different topic, but I'm going to echo what I said in there because the theme is the same. For years, we have held together some critical systems in our state with bubble gum and Band-Aids and paper clips and staples. We've talked about how we have not kept up with basic inflationary spending in our state over decades. And when I got into the Minnesota legislature, one of the first things I became acutely aware of is that we rank at the bottom in this country. When we talk about the legacy of excellence in Minnesota education, we rank at the bottom in this country in terms of providing the support to our students in the category of counselors, social workers, nurses, and school psychologists. It's been an issue I've fought for my entire time in this office. We made a little progress at one point, but otherwise that bill doesn't get a hearing. I also have had the privilege of serving on the Education Committee up until just before the pandemic with an awful lot of people in this room. And one of the things we've heard across this entire great state, corner to corner, teacher shortages before the pandemic. We were already struggling. We knew we were looking at retirements. It has been a problem for a long time. And it has been made worse. And Senator Swedzinski cited the data. The challenges, some of which are just inherent in a pandemic, a historic pandemic, but others have been ongoing and made worse because we're not doing what we can to support our students by supporting the schools that educate them, and that includes supporting the teachers and the other educational professionals who are in those buildings meeting those needs. So, members, we can talk about this bill. We want parents to be involved and informed and empowered. But folks, this is literally the version of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, because our schools and our kids have much bigger needs than this, and it is just disgraceful that that's not what we're talking about every single day. Thank you.
Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, members. Thank you, Senator Kent, for that. I appreciate that. Senator Gazelka mentioned a number of times that he's been listening to parents and talking about the number of students that are leaving our public schools and suggesting we can solve that problem by listening to parents. And while I am sure he is listening to many parents, I know he is not listening to all of the parents of all of the students, despite his effort across the state. And so I want to share what I've been hearing from parents where I live, and in fact from parents that I know also from across the state of Minnesota. And what I hear most often from parents right now is, help us. Help us. I am so underwhelmed by this proposal as a first proposal coming from the majority. When we think about the state of our schools right now, when we think about the importance of our children's education, this is your first offering. This represents help. My kids went to public school all the way through. Expo Elementary, Ramsey Junior High, Central High School. I was an active parent, so was my husband, Joe. Especially when my kids faced trouble, which they did. And they were accountable for it, and so were we. Parents played a very important role in my kids' education, in my kids' schools, in partnership with educators. They got a great education. But the last 2 years have done so much harm to our schools, to our communities, to our families, and especially to our kids. And if we believe, like I do, and I think we do, that our education system, our schools, are the cornerstone for our kids in their future, a jewel in our democratic republic, an anchor in our communities, then we have to do more than reiterate in an email or a letter home something that's already in law. This is completely underwhelming when I think about the pleas that I'm hearing from parents and educators saying, help us. This morning, get an email from a parent saying they're going to cut $500,000 from my kid's elementary school. In a walk this weekend with a girlfriend who's got kids in school, saying every day there is a new teacher leaving the school because they're broken. If we are concerned that there are 22,700 kids leaving our public schools, then we should be doing more than reiterating a policy that's already in law. If we believe that our public schools are a factor, a critical factor in the work that we do, if we are upholding our oath, if we believe in the future of this state rooted in education, then this policy, reiterating what is already in law, as your priority, as the priority of the Senate majority, is underwhelming to the problem that we're facing right now. We need to do better for our kids, for our schools, for our educators, and our communities. This isn't it.
Members, just as a reminder that it is the intent to finish today's session by 1 o'clock. That's not to say I'm cutting anyone off. It's not to say I'm not going to call on people. But committees do have to meet, so we do have a hard stop today at 1 p.m. I still have a few members still on the list, as well as the author and the minority leader that want to speak. So just a brief commentary as far as what our timeline looks like today. Senator Johnson-Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Senator Duckworth. As a child of public education, the product of public education, the child of 2 public school teachers, and a parent, your speech brought tears to my eyes, and I can't agree with you more about the importance of parental involvement. I do have a question, if Senator Duckworth would yield.
He will yield. Senator Johnson Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Duckworth, I'm confused. I guess I took for granted. My girls went to Wayzata Public Schools. I never missed a curriculum night. We had one every semester. I don't think I missed a parent-teacher conference. I remember they're scheduled in October and then again in January. At the beginning of each semester, this was a great opportunity for both my husband and I to talk to the teachers, get a good idea of what was going to be coming, and ask any questions. I guess I took it for granted that public schools did things like curriculum nights and parent-teacher conferences. Senator Duckworth, do you not have those in the Farmington Public Schools?
Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for the question. I greatly appreciate it. My kids go to Lakeville Public Schools. I love Farmington schools. They're also in my district, and I know for a fact they have things like parent-teacher conference, et cetera. As a matter of fact, my daughter had a parent-teacher conference just last week that I was able to participate in. And those are great. They afford us an opportunity to talk with the teachers, the principals, the staff there, and address conversations about our students' progression, how they're doing academically, et cetera. And this bill that we're talking about here today is just another means to help us have those same sorts of conversations, whether it be with teachers, superintendents, administrators, et cetera. So to answer your question, yeah, the Lakeville schools, Farmington schools, I would imagine many public schools across the state have those sorts of opportunities for parents to have conversations with educators. I'm fortunate enough to be a parent that could attend that when it was offered, and this is just another way to help foster and make sure that we are having those conversations. The more we can have, the better.
Senator Johnson Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Duckworth, I agree, but you can only have so many conversations about things before they begin to be a burden. And I agree with my colleagues who have stood up and said, this does seem to be adding undue burden on teachers, on school districts. I find it ironic that the party that is against government control and oversight is offering up an opportunity for even more government oversight in a place where we just don't need it. So I'll be voting no. Thank you.
Senator Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. President. The conversation, Mr. President, has got me wondering help me understand methodology and help me understand one school district I know is not only doing this well, but they brought about when then Senator Newton was on the Anoka Hennepin School Board with me on the Anoka Hennepin School Board, we actually put in place a lot of the curriculum design and the communications that happen. And there's a community curriculum which is made up of parents. Matter of fact, on the programming side, Anoka Hennepin shows a high of 97% satisfaction that parents not only are involved in the curriculum discussion in that Anoka Hennepin School District, but they are also highly recommending the fact that they are not only able to access the curriculum that their student is involved in, but they can do it at any given time. And let me give you an example, Mr. President. This is why it's causing me to understand a confusion here. When we talk about local control, one of the biggest things, when I was in the Bush administration from 2001 to 2004, we heard in the reauthorization of IDEA that there was local control. Don't take it away from the local control, the local school districts and school boards. And I heard that when I got on the Anoka Hennepin School Board in 2005, the same thing. Leave us alone, let us make the decision locally. That's what it was all about. We've heard that across the board, local control. So the confusion for me is now we're going to mandate from the state what should be a local control decision. And the reason I'm bringing this up, Mr. President, is really important to note that the Anoka Hennepin School District not only has a process in place, but at the first day of class, a teacher not only gives the physical syllabus that's there, right? But it's also available online, and you can look right now if you go to the Anoka Hennepin School District website, you can find not only syllabus, but anytime things change within what the curriculum for that student is. And number one, you have a standards issue, but number two, you also have a local decision about what that looks like. And so, Mr. President, I'm wondering if we're sitting here saying we are going to circumvent what really is a local control issue, right? It should be a guiding principle. Why not look at, for example, an Okanagan School District, which, by the way, is the largest school district in the state of Minnesota, Mr. President. I don't know if you knew that, but 5% of the total student population absolutely is within that border. So it's really hard for me to sit here and wonder, why are we trying to create something when we know, and locally I can tell you one school district that does it well and has done it well for years due to the leadership that I brought, that Senator Newton brought, that Senator Abler, who was a House member back then, brought to make sure that there was accountability across the board for our school district. So with that, Mr. President, I'm wondering if we're really just stepping on the local control issue that we all believe should occur in education in Minnesota. Thank you.
Senator Putnam.
Thanks, Mr. President and members. I was inspired a little bit by the conversation between our friends, Senator Duckworth and Senator Johnson Stewart. Do you guys remember going to parent-teacher conferences? Do you remember what that felt like? Yeah. For me, I have this memory in the back of my head of seeing my father, who wasn't especially active in parenting all that often and worked really hard, but it was one of the first times I saw him in slacks instead of jeans, because there was something kind of special about the parent-teacher conference. And I remember how I felt as a kid seeing my teacher and my parents bond in conversation. Sure, that conversation was what about a total knucklehead I was. But what I found most compelling was that they had a context for their conversation about me. They could go back and forth. They could dialogue. They could understand each other's questions could be asked and answers could be offered. And I remember what it felt like to be a kid there and to watch that community of care and investment in my education and in my growth, as judgmental as it was on occasion. See, information without context sometimes creates more problems. You know, later on today, hopefully, we'll get the chance to talk about the question of a syllabus, offering a syllabus. You know, if you looked at the syllabi that I offer as a teacher, and you read it, and you saw, wow, so he teaches Richard Nixon and Barry Goldwater, you would think I got lost when I came in this morning and sat in the wrong part of the floor. But information without context can create resentment and bitterness and destroy the very trust that Senator Chamberlain was praising so much just moments ago. I think we all agree that that's essential, but conversation is more important than information. And information without context can be dangerous and disrupt and disable those conversations and those moments of trust. I completely agree with Senator Chamberlain when he was talking about that the trust is what's so incredibly important now. And trust is reciprocal. It goes both ways. And we cannot have information poached from one place that might disrupt the potential of bonding over the children and their growth. I oppose this bill for that reason. Because we need to build more conversations, not put up more speed bumps that get in the way of those conversations. And information is only one part. This is about relationships and conversations, not just about information.
Senator Rest.
Thank you, Mr. President. A couple of minutes ago, you announced that we're going to have a hard stop at 1 o'clock. And to that issue, I wonder if Senator Gazelka would yield for a question.
He will. Senator Rest.
Thank you. Senator Gazelka, does that mean that you're going to move the previous question and cut off debate if we have not finished the debate on this bill? Is that your understanding of what the President was suggesting by a hard stop? Just stop. No more discussion. I move the previous question, and we'll have a roll call. Is that what you're going to do, Senator Gazelka?
Senator Gazelka.
Mr. President, Senator Rest, I think you know me better than that. We want to make sure that we have good communication all the way through until we actually get to the right place of having a vote.
And Senator Rest, just to reiterate what I said when I made that statement, is it's not intended to stop anyone from discussing anything. I just wanted to alert members that we do have a stop so we can get to the committee hearings that need to take place. So that was the only intent on that. That was not to stop any debate whatsoever.
Thank you, Mr. President. That That is certainly what I understood you to mean, but it seemed to me to need to be clarified, and I have never known Senator Gazelka to cut off debate on anything. So I would not expect that motion to be coming from him. This bill is an important statement for all of us. Not all of us have been teachers, but all of us have been students. And it seems to me that we have a lot to learn from one another with regard to education policy and the role that parents play. Some mentioned having parent-teacher conferences and how much they meant to them. Well, at the school I taught at, we had parent-teacher conferences, and parents didn't often come. Why didn't they come? Because they didn't love their children? No, because they were tired, because they had worked all day, and they just didn't have it in them to do even more. They told me, teaching's your job. Parenting is my job. And I took that seriously. If there was ever an issue, I called the parents. Sometimes they didn't answer it. And I thought that was okay too. But we're changing the roles here in this bill, it seems to me. And I was listening to a conversation online a couple of nights ago, and the speaker said that it's really wonderful, all of the encouragement that parents today are being given to be involved in their children's education. How can they not be when so much of it was online? But the mandates that are coming are, the speaker said, certainly parents belong communicating with their teachers, being involved in their child's education. But you know who doesn't belong in the classroom? Politicians. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Port.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, one thing I just want to make sure we think about today as we're hearing about this bill is that there are places where parents and teachers are not able to communicate clearly. And we aren't investing in solving those problems. There are parents all across Minnesota for whom English is not their first language. There are parents across Minnesota who take older siblings to parent-teacher conferences with them so that they can understand what is going on in their students' classrooms, because not all of these documents are available in the languages that Minnesotans speak. There are places where students or where parents have trouble communicating with our schools because there are not translators available, and not all of this documentation is available in different languages. There are places that we could make investments, real investments, to make our schools more accessible to all of the families across the state of Minnesota, and this bill is not it.
Senator Lopez Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I think this has been a really, really good conversation and debate. I also want to respectfully highlight what Senator Gazelka mentioned at the beginning of his opening remarks, where he said, I'm trying to make schools more successful. I think we all are trying and should be trying to make schools more successful. Mr. President, today we are talking about public education. Probably one of the only times we'll take up this subject on the Senate floor. After 2 years and counting of a global pandemic, that brought tremendous challenges to our schools, to our parents, to our staff, and to our communities. We now have a chance to recover, to help them, to help each other. This is what I call the Minnesota moment. We have a chance to give them the resources that they need and that they have asked for. Not only to thrive in the future, but to also get through the pandemic and to get out of this stronger. We all pride ourselves in the state of Minnesota to have some of the best public schools in the country. I myself am proud to represent one of the best school districts in our state and in the country. And when I was elected, I chose to be on the education committee because of that. And I quickly learned that this issue can be really quickly politicized. This is about parents, but this is also about kids. In fact, it's all about kids. Our state has a long-standing pride of education. In fact, it's on our state constitution. We get reminded of this very, very often. And when I first moved to Minnesota, to go to graduate school, one of my first volunteerism projects I worked on was actually translating for parents to help them understand what the Minnesota school system is and how they are expected to engage in it for the benefit of their kids and their families. That was a volunteer project through my graduate school at the University of Minnesota. We were doing it with Hmong parents, we were doing it with Spanish-speaking parents. And to this day, we still struggle with that, Mr. President and members, because it is an expectation that parents are engaged. I myself had my parent-teacher conference scheduled this week for my 5-year-old. In fact, I talk to the teachers pretty regularly, daily. I get a daily notebook because my kid is struggling. And members, this is personal. I want to help my kid as much as I want to help every single kid in the state of Minnesota who is lucky to attend some of the best public schools in our country. But today, we're hearing the Senate Republican priorities, members, in education. To do more of the same. That's not really needed because the statute is already there. Is this giving students and teachers and parents and educators what they've told us they need? By now, you all have heard it's a resounding no. Does it add the badly needed resources that we're hearing from our teachers for the per pupil formula from our school districts to have the ability to reduce class sizes, to give students the attention they need and deserve? I would say, no, it doesn't. Does it address the special education cross-subsidy that costs every district more than it can afford? Every single district in our state, members, and I will point to a letter that's being handed out right now. All 850,000 students of the public education system would benefit from us solving the cross-subsidy. For parents who are not familiar, if your student has special needs, they are guaranteed, it's their right to have a public education. And we fund that with pride. And if the state doesn't act like a good partner for those school districts pay the price by taking money from the general classroom to make sure that those students have the opportunities that they need and deserve. Does it address the mental health services and school counselors that Senator Kent so eloquently described and how these schools desperately need them? Members, in the beginning of the pandemic, that was the fundamental issue I heard from my parents in my schools. They weren't worried precisely about curriculum, they were worried about the mental health of their kids. This bill does nothing to address that. So members, what Republicans in the Senate here today are offering us is pushing a series of unfunded mandates that are unnecessary because, as they said earlier, they are already in our state law. They're doing this despite the fact that we have more than 40 existing provisions in our state laws that already ensure parents and families to be full partners with teachers and schools. Minnesota parents, all of us, can already review the content of instructional materials, and if they object, they can make reasonable arrangements for alternative instruction. And they can already fully participate in developing their children's plan. And they receive regular notices from school to do so. In short, this solution is a non-solution to a non-problem. This bill is not needed. We already agree that parents are partners, that parents should be engaged in our kids' education. It makes them better parents, better educators, better schools when parents are engaged. But we know, as Senator Port mentioned, that not every parent has the ability to do so. This is a state mandate that ignores our long history of respecting local control, as was also mentioned by one of my colleagues, Senator Hoffman. It will create more unneeded work for teachers and schools. That is no question. Senator Clausen, as a former principal, also mentioned that, and Senator Wicklund, as a former school board member. So this bill, members, is not responding to the moment. We have a surplus of over $9 billion. And we could actually help parents, help teachers, help schools, recruit bus drivers, recruit paraprofessionals, increase teachers of color recruitment. But this bill does nothing. This is the answer to get us through the pandemic for our schools and our kids and our parents. Reiterate an already existing law. Mr. President, I just sent out a letter that we actually just got today from the Minnesota School Boards Association, the Association of the Metropolitan School Districts, Minnesota Administrators for Special Education, Minnesota Association of School Administrators, Minnesota Association of School Business Officials, the Minnesota Association of Secondary School Principals, the Minnesota Elementary School Principals Association, the Minnesota Rural Education Association, and Schools for Equity in Education. All of them asking us, at a minimum, and I quote, "We urge you to eliminate the special education cross-subsidy, to eliminate the English learner cross-subsidy, and to make meaningful investments in the mental health needs of our students." Those three things, members, if we can accomplish anything in education with this surplus, those are the minimum asks of the people who work in schools, of the teachers who teach in schools, and of the parents and kids that serve them. Members, I am beyond disappointed that we are implying that we do not support parents. And Senator Gazelka, again, your goal to achieve in making schools more successful plainly fails with this bill. And it seems that that's not all that we are going to be debating on our Senate floor. There are other education priorities for your caucus that includes an education voucher bill that will defund Minnesota's public education by $178 million. Members, we can do better. To parents, teachers, administrators who have told us that they need to make our schools great, we have been listened. We have proposals for you, and we look forward to continue to fight for them. Minnesota schools are too important to do anything less, and it's too important for the vitality and prosperity of our state. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Normally, I would go to the Majority Leader for final comments. It seems to me that Senator Gazelka will take care of that. Senator Gazelka.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, let's try to get out of the weeds a little bit. There's some conversations about we haven't been funding education, but just a reminder for everyone, we had the largest per pupil funding formula increase last year that we've had in over 10 years. So I think the priorities that we think about in making sure our kids are successful have to do with the resources they have as well. But this is about listening to the parents. Parents above school boards, parents above all the other groups that have weighed in on this issue. What do the parents think? And if a school board is doing it right, like it apparently Senator Hoffman talked about in Anoka, then I don't get letters. I didn't get one letter from the families in Anoka. So, but there are places where perhaps parents don't know that they have the ability to look at that curriculum. And we're just asking that they're notified of the ability to look at the curriculum and that there's not a cost to that. That's all this is including the parents and saying, parents, we want your involvement, we want you engaged. If you disagree with something, we should want to know about it. That's all it is. So, members, this is a simple green vote. And just a reminder, this is in statute, and this was actually passed under Democrat control when Polga Miller was the chair of education.
Final comments to the bill, Senator Miller.
Thank you, Mr. President, members. This bill is very simple. It's all about accountability and transparency. This bill is about engaging parents. This bill is about empowering parents to be partners in their children's education, to be partners with educators to ensure that our kids are getting the top quality education that they deserve in the classroom. That's it. Very simple bill. Accountability, transparency, and engaging parents to be partners with educators to ensure our kids are getting the education they deserve.
Seeing no further discussion, the Secretary will take the roll on final passage of Senate File 2575. I call on Senator Hur to report members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Hur.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to report nay for Senator Fateh.
Fateh votes nay.
Mr. President.
Senator Jasinski.
Senator Jasinski votes aye.
Jasinski votes aye.
I'll do that.
I call on Senator Johnson to report members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Johnson.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Thomasoni votes yes.
Thomasoni votes aye. Senator Johnson.
Senator Lang votes aye.
Senator Lang votes aye. All senators having voted, the secretary will close the roll. There being 37 ayes and 30 nays, Senate File 2575 does pass and its title agreed to.